Welcome back. This is lesson 16 and here you are going to learn about Boolean properties. Many of our components have Boolean properties. A Boolean property can be set to only one of two values, true or false. For example, you can tell Delphi to enable or disable a component by setting the component's enable property to either true or false. Another Boolean property that we use often is the visible property. When you set a component's visible property to true, it can be seen on the form. But if the visible property is set to false, the component will not be seen by your users. You can compare booleans to a light switch. A true setting is like switching a light bulb on, and a false setting is like switching a light bulb off. And that is really how easy it is. Now let's go back to the translation program that we worked on before and let's explore Boolean properties. Here I am back in Delphi's IDE and the translation application is open. Run the application by clicking the Run button in the speed bar. When we created this graphical user interface, we set all the initial properties of our component the way that we want it to look and behave when our users run our application. We set all the initial properties in design time in Delphi's Object Inspector. Later on, we also allowed our users to change properties by clicking on buttons. We added code to the event handlers of the Afrikaans and English buttons. When we set the initial properties of the components, we used English words as the default language for the captions. If you look at this form as it is at the moment, everything is already translated to English. So, if the user now clicks on the English button, he is actually just wasting his time. It is stupid to click on the English button to translate something to English if it is already in English. I'm sure you agree with me. In programs, it is a good practice to only provide functionality that makes sense, or to only give to the user what is needed at that moment. So, with that in mind, we can argue that it will be a good practice to disallow our users to click the English button if the captions are already in English. Close the form to return to design time. Select the English button. Now go to the Object Inspector and scroll to the Enabled property and click on it. In the cell next to the property name is a little drop-down list. Click on the down arrow to drop it down. In this drop-down list you only see two possible values, true and false. The enabled property is therefore a Boolean property. Change the value to false by selecting false in the drop-down list. Now run the application to view the change. Click on the Run button in your speed bar or press the F9 key on your keyboard. Now the English button is disabled. In other words, the code written for that button will not execute, even if the user clicks on it. So, our users cannot attempt to change the captions of the label in the form to English if they are already in English. However, because the captions are English, we still want to allow our users to be able to translate the captions into Afrikaans. So the Afrikaans button must still be enabled. Click the Afrikaans button. The captions change to Afrikaans. But now we have a problem. What if our users want to translate the captions back to English? As it is at the moment, they will not be able to do that because the English button is still disabled. The Afrikaans button is also still enabled. That means that our users can click it again, but that is also stupid because they will only change captions that are already in Afrikaans to Afrikaans again. To provide better logic to this application, we must change it so that our users can only click the Afrikaans button if the captions display English words, and they must only be able to click the English button if the captions are in Afrikaans. Let's go back to our code and implement the logic. Close the form. Let's start with the code for the Afrikaans button. Double-click the Afrikaans button to open its click event handler. After the last statement you added in the previous lesson, add a blank line and on the next line write a comment. It must read, disable the Afrikaans button. On the next line, set the enabled property of BTN Afrikaans to false. Type BTN and press the Ctrl and Space key simultaneously. Make sure BTN Afrikaans is selected in the list and press the Enter key. After the name, type a dot followed by EN. The enabled property is highlighted in the list that pops up. If you have a closer look at the property, you will see that the list indicates to us that this is a Boolean property. In other words, the value that we must assign can only be true or false, nothing else. Press the Enter key on your keyboard, type an assignment operator, followed by the word false, and enter instruction with a semicolon. Let's now write code to enable the English button. First make a new paragraph and type a comment. Then set the enabled property of BTN English to true. Let me just explain this again. When our users click the Afrikaans button, we do not want to allow them to click the button again. That is because the captions will then already be translated to Afrikaans, and it doesn't make sense to change the Afrikaans caption to Afrikaans again. Therefore, when the Afrikaans button is clicked, it must disable itself. But that is only part of the logic. When the captions are translated to Afrikaans, we also want to enable the English button to allow the user to translate the captions back to English. Okay, let's test the code now. Run the application. Click the Afrikaans button. The English button is now enabled and ready for our users to translate the captions back to English. And the Afrikaans button is now disabled. Click on the English button. The captions do change back to English, but the logic is still wrong. The English button must now be disabled and the Afrikaans button must be enabled. We must now go back to our code to implement the right logic for the English button. So close the form. After the last line in the English button's click event handler, write code to enable the Afrikaans button and to disable the English button. Also add comments, indentation and blank lines to document and style your code. Okay, these two instructions are the opposite of the two instructions that we added in the click event handler for the Afrikaans button. Let's quickly look at the logic again. When our users click on the English button, it must enable the Afrikaans button because we want our users to translate English to Afrikaans. But because the captions are already translated to English, we don't want to allow our users to translate English to English. Therefore, we must disable the English button by setting its enabled property to false. Before we test the logic, just notice how I used true and false. Boolean property values are not enclosed in single quotation marks like string values. Now let's test the logic. Run your application again. Click the Afrikaans button. The captions display in Afrikaans and the English button is now available and the Afrikaans button is disabled. Now click the English button. The captions change back to English and the Afrikaans button is now available while the English button is disabled. As you can see here, a Boolean property behaves like a light switch that switches light bulbs on or off. In future lessons you will explore more Boolean properties. However, this lesson should be enough for you to understand any Boolean property for any other component. In the next lesson we will look at string values in more detail. I will show you how to join two or more strings and how to display string results as output in a memo. Please don't continue to the next lesson if you have not done all the previous lessons. I'll talk to you again in the next lesson.